Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth. This program features in-depth conversations with the leading names in the subjects of UFOs, abductees, the paranormal, panel discussions, and the very best and brightest of the next generation of writers and researchers. Meanwhile Here on Earth, the show breaking new ground in alternative talk with your intrepid host, veteran investigative writer and researcher, Peter Robbins.
Hello, and as that mellifluous voice said, this is Peter Robbins, your intrepid host. The show is Meanwhile, Here on Earth. And this is a special show for me in several ways. New to KUNX digital broadcasting, I have as my guest not just my producer for this show, but the person who was my first producer when I first started on radio, and the person who brought me into radio, my friend Race Hobbs. Race has researched and investigated the UFO phenomena for over 30 years. In 1990, while working as a disc jockey at KZKZ 106.3 FM in Fort Smith, Arkansas, he was a witness to something very unusual over South Fort Smith. He wasn't sure what it was, but it was something that he had never seen before, and it ignited his curiosity into the UFO subject. He started the Fort Smith Aerial Phenomena Research Group in 1992 and began officially investigating sightings in the River Valley area. In 2006, he began attending local MUFON meetings in Fort Smith. By 2007, he had become a MUFON field investigator and was fast-tracked to state section director and worked to build the group and MUFON organization and spread the word about the UFO reality to the citizens of Arkansas and Oklahoma. In 2004, Race developed, hosted, and co-produced the official MUFON radio program, broadcast weekly directly from MUFON headquarters. Race is one of thousands, perhaps millions of people who have a true interest in the search for the truth regarding the UFO phenomena and things unexplained. Quote, I continue to look forward to the day we all know the truth about what has clearly been invading the airspace over our cities and towns, our military installations and countrysides with absolute impunity. One thing is for certain, UFOs have been here, UFOs are here, and everyday citizens from every walk of life are seeing them. Sometime around 2010, Race married his love of broadcasting with his passion for UFOs and began to develop his own podcast and later live radio show called Eyewitness Radio, which I'd been a guest on. In late 2010, Race created and co-founded the KGRA digital broadcasting station, the Global Radio Alliance, and served as owner, executive director for 8 years until he sold it to begin a new challenge. Currently, Race is working for his longtime friend Margie Kay as head of programming here at KUNX Digital Broadcasting, the OnX network, explaining the unexplained. Race brings his years of terrestrial radio experience to the digital broadcasting revolution and is one of the first personalities to start live remotes from UFO events around the country, making appearances to meet listeners and broadcast live radio. You will not find a man more passionate about radio and the subjects he produces and engineers. With more than 15 years programming talk radio, hosting his own shows, and thousands of hours in producer's seat, there's probably no one any more knowledgeable about the paranormal research community and where it might be heading. And Race Hobbs, welcome to my show on your network. It's great to have you here as my guest.
I've got to say, I've known for a little while that we were going to do this show, and I wanted to have something really proper to say right now, something really, pertinent to this it's hard for me to do it. I just want to say thank you for having me after almost 3 years It's about damn time.
Good point.
It's an honor to be here, Peter. Thank you for having me.
By the way, just to point this out, I kind of see myself as a bit of a visionary here. Your voice is quite pronounced. You might actually have a career in radio with the way that you speak.
I've been told that a time or two. I have, but a lot of people, and thank you to every one of you who have over the years, the many of you that have given me compliments on my voice. I've got two voices. I've got the country at home, hanging out with friends and family voice, and then I've got a radio voice, and there's two different ones. Like right now, I'm just talking normal, like you and I would when we were having a pint, at the pub at one of these events we do. And then I've got the radio voice where I talk like this and promote stuff, and and so there's a distinction between a lot of people. Race, just talk your normal voice. Well, when you're doing promos and specific commercials and things like that, it requires you to kind of change things up a little bit, because I have to work at it. I'm really not one of these ones like a Jimmy Church or a Clyde Lewis that just has that natural, it's like somewhere down the line they realized that they had this resonance and this tone to them, and they stayed there and they just talked like that all the time. And now, after all these years, that's their voice. The radio voice is their voice. So,
you've just triggered a memory I have to share with you.
Yeah,
quite a long time ago when I taught. I taught for years at the School of Visual Arts in New York City, postgraduate painting level. But for 5 of those years, I also taught at a private school in Brooklyn Heights, a very historic district in Brooklyn. And I was in charge of lower school art education lower school art education for first, second, and third graders for several of those years, which was joyous and goofy and inspiring and at times a little insane, but never less than memorable. And on certain days, I'd be working, say, with third graders all day, and then I'd go in to teach night school, often to, professionals of all distinctions and people either wanting to get better in painting or just wanting to learn how. And I remember coming into school one day for night class with my head filled with third grade chatter and hysterical observations, and coming up behind somebody and saying, "Oh, what beautiful colors you're using." And they turned around and looked at me like, I said, "I'm sorry, I've been working with 7 or 8-year-olds all day." Just, putting a little too much emphasis into the way I said it. It is just a goofy moment.
And it happens. You know what I mean? Like when I'm a grandfather now. Like, I have been for some time, but now I've got like 3 or 4 grandkids that are, they're littler than larger, right? And so, spending time with the grandkids and talking like a little kid, and then I come back home and say Robin and I are, cooking out or whatever. And then I'm talking to her like she's a little kid, like in my grandchild voice. And I'm like, "I'm sorry, honey." She said, "No, it's cute, but
I salute the world of mothers just for
I don't know how they can like toggle back and forth between the real world and the fantasy world that we create for our children growing up.
As important a job as there is.
It is. It absolutely is. There's no, you can't just build one of those.
And because you helped me develop the format that I think makes my show somewhat distinctive, I'd like to begin by just asking you some questions leading to how you became the person that you are. Where were you born?
I was born in Fort Smith, Arkansas, back in the late 60s, and I have resided there or in a little town I'm in now called Van Buren, which is right across the river. The Arkansas River comes right through Fort Smith. anyone that knows a map of the United States, there's an interstate that goes from North Carolina to like right up against California. Interstate 40. It runs right down the middle of the United States. Like 80 runs east and west up on the top of the United States. 40 runs through the middle, and I am like I can throw a rock and hit that freeway from here. And the Arkansas River comes down out of the Colorado, comes out of the Rocky Mountains and comes down, and it flows right through into Oklahoma and through Arkansas. And it's Arkansas River, and it's a pretty good sized river that flows right through Fort Smith and heads right across the state and spills into the Mississippi River on the east side of the state. And so Fort Smith is sort of like it's like an industrial city. Back in the early days, it was like Kansas City. It was like one of the last stops. It was the last stop before you went into native territory.
Yeah,
heading west to California.
When you say just the words Fort Smith, to me as an Easterner, I think of like Mark Twain's wonderful adventures of traveling west before the Civil War, and a name like Fort Smith becomes emblematic, especially to a boy fascinated by cowboys and Indians, and living that child's life that we did back then, a lot more innocent and less informed. Your dad, what was his business?
Everyone out there that's around our age, I don't know about new kids today, but most people have heard of the Flintstones.
Sure.
That's my family. My father operated heavy equipment in a rock quarry all my life. He worked for the same company for 34 years.
Wow.
And retired from there. Whew. Yeah.
That's old school.
That's what my father did for a living. My mother, she was I'm looking at a picture of her right now. She was a little, I wish I had gotten you some photographs. If I had.
We'll make the pictures come alive in people's heads.
My mother was a small little Cherokee Indian. And she was a bookkeeper and an assistant administrator of a retirement home. When she retired, that's what she was doing. But she was a secretary and a bookkeeper for most of my life, off and on, when she wasn't, bringing in. I was the smallest. I was the youngest of 5 children.
5, wow.
The next closest was 5 years in age difference from me to my sister, my older sister.
That's a different way to grow up.
I had 3 older sisters and 1 older brother. Yeah, wow. and the next closest sibling was 5 years older than me. So suffice it to say, if Sherlock Holmes investigated that matter, we would probably be able to deduce that I wasn't playing. In fact, my father used to make a joke about it, which I won't share with you here. But I was way down there a little bit. So, it was a little tough growing up. I didn't realize it then, but later in life, after analyzing my childhood and my siblings, from an adult reality,
sure,
it came to an understanding with me that, yeah, I took some licks from, growing up underneath. Now, my oldest sister, she was like a mother and a sister to me. She was 10 years, a little more than 10 years older than me.
Yeah.
So when I was born, she was already 10 years old. By the time I was 3, she was, 13. I was like a little living doll for her. She was the one that was putting dresses on me and putting makeup on me and, and nice. All that kind of stuff. Good. But, my older brother was, almost 6 years older than me. So when we were playing wiffle ball in the yard or basketball in the street or, kickball or whatever, and I wanted to play, I was always too young. You're too little, go do something else. You know what I mean? Because his crowd, his friends were all the friends in my neighborhood that were my age were girls. And a lot of people would be like, well, that would be great. That'd be a good thing. Well, it wasn't so good sometimes. I mean, it was good.
Well, from that child's, I want to be a man, whatever that means, and I'm not supposed to be playing with girls, or
it was tough. I mean, they were all their own. They had their own personalities. They were all different. But they all sort of accepted me. They had their group, right? And they just kind of accepted me. They were rough on me. Sometimes they would gang up on me, pile up on me, and beat up on me. You know what I mean? Like if I would push it too far, be too rough or, whatever. But, they were the best of friends, and I still love each and every one of them to this day.
I was going to say, I think you're probably more fortunate than you realized at the time to grow up with close contact with girls.
It was a great way to fall in love. You know what I mean? Because one or two of them, I think kind of impressed how I saw females for the rest of my life. In my younger teens and my mid-teens and in my early 20s, I would reflect back to situations that I had with my friends from the neighborhood. And it helped me in my development a lot because, being in radio in high school and out of high school and, at a young age, and pretty much not having to worry, you got a name like race. In a high school, you play football, golf, and tennis, and you're in FBLA, and you're in all these activities, and everybody knows who you are. And I only knew about a 10th of them, and I didn't have any trouble really getting dates or anything like that. You know what I mean? It wasn't that kind of a thing for a fella like me.
Let me ask you something, which is, we all grew up with television as a ubiquitous, entertainment center and information center in our lives. But radio is something wholly other, especially radio that was there when we were young. First, I wanted to ask you, growing up, did you lean in more to kind of learning about the world or as a point of information, reading for pleasure as opposed to for school, or was it films that kind of brought you into other worlds, or both things?
It was very much a visual aspect for me.
Mm-hmm.
I read books and I read things mostly because I was supposed to.
Right.
I was never one that took to reading because I enjoyed going into that third mind, that third eye, and in my mind, and traveling through these adventures and things. I was more a visual kid that dove into Star Trek and Night Gallery.
Good show, yeah.
And and then of course earlier cartoons and things like that. But I was a watcher. I could watch my father lay tile. I could watch him make the mortar. I could watch him make the grout. There's two different ways that you do that. Well, there's many ways you can do it, but how he did it, I knew the steps. I knew how long he mixed it and what he mixed it with, and how he set those terracotta tiles. And I could watch him do it once or twice, and then he could walk away and I could do it. I could do it myself. In detail, like, I was, my father was very much an outdoorsman, and he, had boats and things like that, fishing and hunting and, all that. We had a dog kennel where we raised pointers and English setters. And I had a couple of beagles early on because I was a rabbit hunter when I started. I loved rabbit hunting. He was a quail hunter. He was a bird hunter, pheasant and quail. That's what he loved to do. And he taught me. I watched him backing a boat into the garage so many times. Backing it into the water.
That is an art. I hear you.
And one day my dad said, "You want to try it?" backing it into down the boat ramp into the lake. And I said, yeah. And I think I was, 12 or 13 years old. And so he let me do it. And so I wheeled it around, backed it right down in there. I was just a natural at it from watching him all those years. And, by the time I was 14, I had my permit. Back then, you could get your permit at 14, and you could, as long as you had a licensed driver in the car, you could drive. And I was towing in a big 4-wheel drive truck, our big bass boat, an hour and a half drive to the lake with my mom in the passenger seat or my dad in the passenger seat. And I was backing it in and out of our home there and parking it and pulling it in and out of the lake. And when my dad would pull up to the dock, I would jump off. I'd go run and get the truck and back it down into the water, to get the boat on the trailer. I was just a natural at learning how to do things visually.
Let me ask you a question. It's the visual education, entertainment that we get that as kids often sets the patterns for the rest of our lives. Your love of movies, did that begin primarily in watching movies on television, or did your family go to the movie theater together, or did you go as a kid on your own? This interests me with so many people only because I'm a movie maniac, and it a huge effect on my life to this day.
For us, movies were a huge treat for us, for our family. But by the time that I was around 4 or 5 years old, my sister was in high school, my oldest sister, Carla, and her best friend, Terry Durbin, worked at the mall trio movie, where the movies were in the mall. And so that was in 75, 76, 77, right around in there. She was working at the movies when Star Wars came out, when Jaws came out.
Oh boy.
So,
what fun.
I got dragged to Jaws. Okay.
4 years old?
I was good. Yeah, probably 5 years old, right around in there somewhere, 5, maybe 6. Let's see. Jaws came out in 76, I think, maybe, or 77. Hey, Google, when did the movie Jaws release?
75.
The release dates of Jaws included June 20th, 1975, June 16th, 19...
You did it, Peter. So in 75,
taking over.
You're the master. And so I was probably around 6.5 years old then, like when that kind of, and I'll never forget, I was good, man. I was sitting in my mom's lap because my mom was the adult that brought all the little teenagers and all, even 2 or 3 from the neighborhood, our kids, my brothers and sisters, and then kids from the neighborhood.
Sure.
And I'm crawled up in her lap.
What's the scene?
And then the scene where the head falls out from the bottom of that boat, that hole in that boat. It traumatized me. I screamed. Rob, Peter, my mother had to gather me up and take me out into the lobby and get me some popcorn and some candy, calm me down. And she brought me back in.
It's not a real head here.
Yeah. She gave me the whole speech. But we were able to go to movies anytime we wanted for free because my sister worked there.
That's great.
So, and the mall trio was it had 3 screens, which was huge back then. It was not, because we had gone to the drive-in. We used to go to the drive-in when I was a little boy. And there was a swing set and teeter-totters and stuff underneath the big screen. That's where all the kids played. Underneath the playground was underneath that massive screen where all the parents could watch the show and still keep an eye on their kids right underneath it from their car. So I very much got to see a lot of movies and all when I was young and then growing up. And then we had, I think we had 3 or 4 channels when I was little. We had
Sure.
a
That's right.
19-inch black and white on a little
ABC,
stand
NBC, CBS, and something else.
and a static channel. Yeah. And then, that's when I began my career as a remote control. My dad would come home. My dad would come home, Peter, from working all day in that rock quarry.
Give me that.
He'd take a shower, and my father, he always sang in the shower. He would Wabash Cannonball or something. And and he would come in there and he'd get in his easy chair and wait on dinner. And if one of us kids came through, hey, Race, run over there and change the channel for me, will you? You go over there and you stand. And when you only had 3 channels, it wasn't that bad. But along came cable. And by then, we had a color console, 25-inch Zenith console. And we had cable, which jacked it up to 15 channels or something. And so then you'd be there just praying for a fishing show or an outdoor show or something. And the moment that he said, okay, right there's good, you ran out and you didn't come back till the street lights were on.
Let me ask you something. What are your earliest memories of listening to the radio?
Oh my goodness. Well, I think my second oldest sister, Debbie. She was her and my oldest sister loved music, but Debbie was the one that first bought headphones so she could listen to music later at night when my parents were, you know what I mean? That's how much she loved music. Yeah. And so she gave me my love of music. My sister Debbie did. And my sister Carla helped a lot, but Debbie was the one that really turned me on to it. And she showed me how to dial in the radio. I'll never forget her teaching me how to turn that knob and find what I wanted on that little dial. I had no idea how to do that up until she taught me.
That's a huge, it's like a key to another world.
Yeah. And it was never talk radio. It was always music. And
what kind of music were they? Traditional rock and roll at the time, or country western, or eclectic?
Peter, let's go on the record. Everybody can mark it down. Race Hobbs' eternal group of all time, best group, is Earth, Wind, and Fire. Without a question. No, and it shocks people to this day when I say I was just listening to them this morning. But
one of my favorite rock and roll songs is September.
There it is. Well,
doesn't get much better.
They've got dozens of hits, but they've got hundreds of great songs that, their albums are the ones that they're among the ones that you can do what we used to do back then, where you put the needle on the record and you just let it go. There was no bouncing around to this song or that song all the time on, I just want to hear this song. You could listen to the whole album, no problem. And of course, there are thousands of those, but Boston, Kansas, Queen, REO Speedwagon, AC/DC, all the rock, the soft rock and clay. I even liked Air Supply. You know what I mean? Like my sisters, they Hall and Oates, like they gave me a wide range of music between the two of them, to swim through and find, where I was at home. And for me, and of course, like Boston and Kansas and Jefferson Starship, and, there's Thin Lizzy. I could go for days, but my era was Def Leppard, Motley Crue, Scorpions, it was just that whole, Guns N' Roses and all that. That was my high school years. And I loved all of them. But I was on the radio, I was playing contemporary hit radio first, and then I went to AOR where I was playing adult oriented rock and stuff. So classic rock and that kind of stuff. But my love came early on through my sisters. And that's how I started listening to radio. And when I was out and about, and I, had headphones with the antenna, and you could dial in the radio stations while I was on my bike,
Yes, absolutely. Perfect to keep you distracted from a horn honking.
Yeah, from a diesel truck coming.
Hopefully they'll be stepping on the brake at the right moment. How did you either stumble into or become introduced to talk radio, though?
Talk radio came from the UFO world, from my interest in UFOs.
And let's talk about exactly when and how that started.
There was a gentleman that broadcast out of Oklahoma, and you've been on his show, and his name was Jerry Pippin.
Oh, love Jerry.
God rest his soul.
Yeah.
He was one of my mentors, but he was among the first guys that came through Fort Smith and did a talk here, and was at an event that, he was recording and interviewing people from. And, and I got to hear that on the radio. I didn't get to go to the event, but I heard him on the radio talking about UFOs. And I always had an interest in UFOs. I always, would turn an ear when my mom and dad were talking about it. And my dad was always saying they weren't real, and my mom was always saying they were. My dad believed in ghosts, but he didn't believe in UFOs.
How interesting.
Yeah. But, it was Jerry Pippin, the first person I heard on talk radio talking about UFOs. And then, of course, later, Art Bell, on Coast to Coast AM.
You bet.
And I had flipped over learning about FM radio and everything and how to do my thing there. I had just flipped it over on AM and was scanning through, seeing what was there. And it always seemed like a cheap, like second rate type radio. The signals were never as clear and powerful as FM radio, but I came across a station that syndicated Art Bell at night, and I would listen to Art Bell. And that's where, between Jerry Pippin and Art Bell, that's where talk radio, that's where it, kind of got wormed into my psyche there.
Race, did you ever have a UFO sighting?
I did. I
actually mentioned it in the introduction, but can you tell us a bit about it?
Of course I can. Yeah. Really briefly, I'll just give you the synopsis. It was I was on the radio station. I was broadcasting on a rock station, and I was doing 7 to midnight, and I was getting close to being off work. And I decided at that point that I needed to gather up all my CDs, because we had a huge library of CDs that the station provided for the music. But I had a big bag of CDs of stuff that I brought that we didn't have, but that I had gotten cleared through the program director to play from time to time. Mm-hmm. Because people would call in back then and they would make requests, right? And sometimes they would request stuff that, a track that we didn't have. And so I tried to go out and get those so that I had what they wanted to hear whenever I could. So I was like, I got to pack up all these CDs. Oh, Jesus. So I put in a long song. It was like an 8-minute song. Like a 6-minute song. And I was packing up CDs and everything, and the phone was ringing. And I was like, man, I'm getting ready to go. I don't have time for this. I got to get my stuff together to get out of here. And so by the time I got done, that phone was still ringing. I picked it up, and it was this guy calling from his cell phone in his car. One of those, the brick phones from back in the day. And so he's like, Race. And I was like, yeah, man. Yeah. And he was like, dude, there's a UFO right over the top of my car. And I was like, what? And he goes, look, man, I'm at the 3-way in Pensacola, blah, 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 highway, blah, blah, blah. And I'm on the side of the road looking up at a UFO right over the top of my car. If you go out the back of your radio station, you'll see it. And I was like, okay, hang on, and put the phone on hold. I ran down the hallway, took a left into the general manager's office because her office had sliding glass doors that went out to a big patio in the back of the building. And I went out that slide glass door, and I was standing on that patio, and I was looking to the south, and I saw this bright white bluish light. And I said this 100 times. The only thing I could compare it to was like a welding arc, like a welder.
Yep.
When you see that real intense, you know, the kind of light that when you look away and you blink, you've got a spot in your eyesight. It was that bright. I could see, I want to say it was about 25, 30 degrees off of my horizon there.
Was it close enough to discern any kind of shape?
No, not from where I was.
Okay.
No, I could see the light, but I couldn't see what it was attached to. Again, we're approaching midnight and it's dark, but it was clear. It was a clear night. There was no haze, no fog, no low cloud deck, nothing. It was just right there. And I could see, because from where our radio station was, Peter, it was a strategic place that they put it. And where I live in the River Valley is, imagine big mountains coming down from the north. And I'm not talking about Rocky Mountains. I'm just talking about like Smoky Mountains.
Sure.
They're all land and soil covered and tree covered mountains. And you've seen them up there in Eureka Springs. You know what I'm talking about.
Sure.
They're big hills, like, right? And that's the Ozarks that come down from the north. And then you're in a valley where the Arkansas River snakes through from east to west. And then a mountain range starts in the south, and it's called the Ouachitas. That goes from, South Fort Smith all the way down into Louisiana, over into Oklahoma and across the southern state of Arkansas. So there's 2 national forest ranges with mountains in them to the north and one to the south. And the River Valley is a low ground that sits right between the 2 of them with a river passing through it. And where our radio station was positioned was up on a plateau right in the middle of that valley. It was sort of like the highest little hump. So from up there, you're kind of looking down in all directions of the valley, right? You're not looking down, but more at a downward angle, because it wasn't really super high, but it was the highest point in the valley down there. And so I was looking at an angle down to the south and literally looking into Oklahoma, because the border is just right there. And I could see the light from this object shining on the foliage and the canopy below it, the tree canopy. I could see it was shining onto the ground underneath it from where I was. I'm sitting here watching this thing just float slowly from right to left, just slowly, constant, no sound, no abrupt movements or change in its direction or trajectory or anything. And I was just like, oh shit, I'm on the radio. And I forgot that I was running a radio station still. And I run back in and I had dead air, just dead air. And so I was like, I've got to get a long song. And I grabbed a song that I knew was like 8-9 minutes long. And it was Molly Hatchet, Dreams I'll Never See. And I threw it in the deck and I hit play and I turned it up and I picked up that phone and I said, are you there? And he goes, did you see it? Did you see it? And I was like, I saw it, man. I saw it. What was that? And he goes, dude, I've never seen anything like that. I said, what did it look like? And he said, Race, it looked like a big black submarine, like a big black cigar. And the light was on the front of it, not the back of it, but the front of it. And he was sitting, there's a highway, and then there's another highway that connects to it, and we call it the T. and or the intersection. And there's a street light there, and there's a little gas station there. And one way goes to Poto, Oklahoma. Another way goes to Fort Smith, Arkansas, and the other way goes to Spiro, Oklahoma, where the Indian Mounds are. Pretty popular location for people who are interested in mounds and, 9, 10, 12-foot skeletons and that kind of thing, because they found a 9-foot skeleton in that 33-foot mound over there. And so it's kind of a popular place. But anyway, that's where he was, and he was sitting at that light, and he could see the shadows of the trees just off the road moving.
That's dramatic.
He knew it. He said, Race, I realized it was bright out, but it was just like a full moon to kind of brightness.
Yeah.
But when I looked over, I could tell the shadow was slowly moving under the trees.
Oh.
So when it turned green, he pulled through the light and pulled over on the shoulder and got out and looked to see what was up there. And it was that object. So that was when I went back out, the object was gone. And then, we hung up. I never heard from him again. That was my first time I ever laid eyes on an object.
Quite exciting.
Yeah, on an object that I couldn't identify. And it was literally headed right over Fort Chaffee, which was a World War II Army training base out there, artillery and heavy mechanics, and tanks, and all that kind of stuff. That's what they trained with out there in World War II. And by then it had been annexed by the federal government, and they were using it for different federal training missions and special ops and stuff like that out there.
Let me ask you a related question. As I read in your introduction, almost by osmosis, there are a few people that I know who have gotten a better education, hands-on, in terms of people involved in UFO studies and who have had these experiences have been taken the same for the wider world of the paranormal. And most of us have, at least a couple of experiences in our life that we look back on and say, that was something else again, or that was a lot more than a coincidence, or that I read into it this, or it convinced me. Have you had in your life, as opposed to just knowing about other people's, any profoundly or particularly memorable, what we would call paranormal experiences?
A couple. I've seen ghosts. Like
share one of them with us.
100% real. 100%.
Set the scene.
There's a story that it's unequivocally true. This is, there's no doubt about it. I had moved back with my parents briefly while I waited on my new place to be ready. And it was about a 2-week layover because I had worked on a job out of state. And when I came back to get a new place in the River Valley in Fort Smith, I stopped over at my parents and was, and I smoked cigarettes then. I started smoking cigarettes after high school. And so I was sitting on the front porch one night smoking outside. I had to go outside to smoke. And my father, he had the city, he had petitioned the city and had the city install a street light at the end of his driveway down there, because the house sat in a pecan grove, and it was like a hill that came down, sloping hill, and there was a street up here, and there's a street here, and there's a street here on this long slope, and ours was on the bottom slope, the very bottom, and it's full of massive pecan trees everybody's yards, all as far as you
Ooh,
could see left and right, were all these big pecan trees.
that's great.
It was. You had snacks walking to and from school. There's always squirrels everywhere. but I was sitting there smoking, and my father had a problem because there was a street light at the end of each street of the street, but they were so far away that by the time you got to the middle of the street, it was black. It was dark.
And
So
about what time of day or night
I want
was
to say it was around 11, maybe 11 o'clock, maybe. I can't
in the
really
evening?
a long time. Yeah. And
Okay.
because my
Continue.
parents were in bed, they were already in bed, and they usually went to bed around 10.
Got it.
So it was a short time after that. And I just kind of quietly stepped out to have a smoke before bedtime. And so, but anyway, they put the street light in right at the end of our driveway, which is just about the middle of that street.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had a brand new street light there. And I remember thinking it wasn't there when I left, when I,
Sure.
when I was last in Fort Smith. And so I was like, I'm going to have to check with my dad, and because I didn't even notice the pole out there when I came back. But anyway, I was sitting there and my parents were asleep, and I started to see something slightly moving in the street down there. And my eyes trained on it, and I'm watching it slowly move. And there were what came to be clearly three figures: a taller person, which looked like a man, a woman on the other side of him, a little shorter, and then a smaller, shorter figure on this side. And it was like a silver lining around them. Like when you look up at a real pretty puffy cloud and the sun's back behind it, and
Yes.
that real beautiful silver lining around
Backlit.
that's exactly what it looked like. Robin and I were watching Caught on Camera the other night, and they had a video of like a closed circuit TV camera on someone's house.
Sure.
And it had ghosts walking down the street, and it looked exactly the same. I jumped out of my chair hysterically pointing at the TV, and I said, "That's it, Robin, that's it." She goes, "I was just thinking that looked like the story you told me." But as they got closer to the light, Peter, the lining got a little more intense and a little more defined. I never saw their feet. I never saw their legs. In that video I saw on TV, I could see their feet, but I never saw their feet or their legs.
You couldn't discern the way that they were dressed. They just were
not too much. I mean, it looked like the guy had a hat on, like a fedora maybe. But I'd seen another man that had a fedora on in a house and that I lived in with Robin later. This was before I ever met Robin. This was when I was in my early 20s. And as they went under the light, it was right on them. As they got past that street light, it was lit up behind them, but they just faded away. The further they got away from that light, the more they faded away. And I was cold sober there. I wasn't drinking. I wasn't smoking weed or doing anything. Unless there was something in that cigarette that caused me to hallucinate for a few minutes. It took me a while to figure out what to absorb that, to sort of palletize that, because it was quite a profound moment for me. And I remember talking to my dad about it the next day. I was talking to him about the street light and telling him what I saw, and Dad believed it, because Dad said he saw a ghost when he was 8 years old in this old 1800s saloon called the Brandon Iron that's still standing down there on Midland Boulevard.
Did he go into detail on that with you?
He did. He said
that
he was 8 years old. My great grandfather ran a still during Prohibition up in Shayburg, Arkansas, Mountainburg up there, and he had a little small general store, I think, where he had 5 sons, and they all lived up there on the mountain.
Wow.
And the 4 of the 5 sons, one of my great uncles got the fever, so he was a little bit special needs. This one, Bobby, was. But the other 4 went on to, become very successful, and several of them, of course, they went into the military, World War II. They went into the Army and Air Corps and all of that. And so one of them was in the stationed at the base down there in Fort Smith at Fort Chaffee, where I told you about. I saw the UFO headed towards. And he knew that he got word that the Army Corps of Engineers was going to build a pontoon bridge from the town I'm in now, Van Buren, across the river to Fort Smith and connect them. So my great-grandfather Osti sold his whole steel operation and everything, and his land and his place up there. And he took that money and came down here and bought a big chunk of land on the river on the Fort Smith side, where he knew that bridge was going to connect.
Wow.
And he wound up selling land back to the city for the Arkansas-Oklahoma State Fairgrounds and for another project the city had. But he owned a bunch of that land, and he put a gas station in there and what they called courts. They were little small kitchenettes, little tiny houses. You walked in, there was a table and chairs there. There was a bed over in the corner. There was a little counter and a sink with a hot plate and a little small fridge. And then there was a wall and the door and the bathroom and the shower.
So is this like for, kind of motel kind of rentals? Or?
Yes. They were like little small hotel rooms with a
Nice.
Tiny kitchen in them.
Each one their own building, though.
Yeah, you could rent them by the week or the month or the day or the night, And they called them courts. There were the Hobbs courts. And so travelers coming through from up north, which interestingly, Bonnie and Clyde came through there. There's actually in the family a photograph of Bonnie and Clyde at the gas station with my great grandfather. Just sitting in some chairs in the evening, out lounging right outside there. But they used to come through from Missouri on their way down to Texas and Louisiana, and they would stop at my great grandfather's place. But that's what it was. It was a fuel stop. They had the old visible gas pumps and the whole bit. And that's how my great grandfather became so successful in the city. And all of his sons went on to be presidents of banks and finance companies. And one of them went into the Air Force, was a test pilot in the Air Force. I mean, they were all very successful individuals. And it was all because of my grandpa, who was great grandfather was a moonshiner.
Was there anything else in your father's description of the ghost that he felt?
Yes, I am so sorry. I digress.
We do it all the time.
One of the assets that my grandfather bought was right at the edge of the property he bought was a saloon called the Brandon Iron. And it had several owners over the years. But at the time my father was 8 years old, it was closed and it was just boarded up and locked up. And him and a bunch of his little friends went and broke in through the back, and they broke into it, and they were in there playing cowboys and, bellying up to the bar and having a beer. And, they were, just kids. And they heard, my father said that he heard, I'm sorry about that, Peter, I sure trailed off, but my father heard chains upstairs. He heard chains, and they just stopped what they were doing and started listening. And the chains stopped, and then they could hear clop, clop.
Oh boy.
Clop. And they thought there was someone living up there, and they were just frozen. And one of the little boys ran out the back the way they came in. He tore out, and the other 3 stayed with him. And they could hear boots coming down the stairs. And they're looking at the stairs because my dad knew that his grandfather owned the building and that there wasn't supposed to be anybody in there. So he was kind of like, that's what gave him the bravery to stay there. And he said they heard footsteps come all the way down those stairs to the bottom floor.
Whoa.
And then a chair bumped over, and then there was nothing. They didn't see anything. They didn't hear anything. That was it. But the chair moved when the footsteps stopped. And he swears that it was real. He swears that it's the truth. And that's why he believed in ghosts and not UFOs, because he believed all the government rhetoric about UFOs. But I saw them. I saw ghosts. I saw what I saw.
I think your dad did too. And that is where we're going to stop for the first hour. This is Peter Robbins, my very special guest tonight, this morning, this afternoon. It's all relative. Is my producer and dear friend Race Hobbs. The show is Meanwhile Here on Earth, and we will be back shortly. And welcome back to this particular episode of Meanwhile Here on Earth. Peter Robbins, your host, special guest, Mr. Race Hobbs. And there he is.
Peter, I'm so sorry I trailed off. Your show is so original to be able to just get on here and talk about stuff that I haven't thought about in forever. And so, getting back on those stories, I could just go forever. I love this format. I love it.
A lot of what we do is either ourselves or facilitate the ancient art of telling stories. And in our case, many of the stories, for some folks, sound like fiction, but they're not. And I have been it's been a privilege to pursue this format because some of my guests talk about things that they had not planned on. Some of them very impacting, very emotional, hysterically funny, or just a tangent that, as far as I'm concerned, this may be the only opportunity they have. And if it's interesting enough to me, go. I will occasionally cut people off because we've tangented ourselves into the next dimension. You need to reel them back.
Yes. You're going to have to do that with me, old friend, for sure. Probably.
No, it's this is part of why I wanted to do the show with you, just essentially see where it went and have some fun with it. You and I met in Sebring, Florida, legendary for its annual auto race. More than
they were having some pretty cool races there then.
Yeah, I mean,
when we were there. I was out there
in Daytona. That's right. In fact, if you'll remember, there were times in terms of recording that were problematic because we were very close to the track.
Yeah, and Porsche was having they were having trials one day and then the race the next day there. So there was all like Porsches racing. It was really cool.
Well, I remember the weekend in particular because I got to meet you, Rob. I met Denise Stoner for the first time, and Chase Kletsky. And I spoke at the conference, but I was also emceeing it.
Yes.
And it was an existential challenge because I had got myself a good case of laryngitis. And if you're emceeing an event, that can impact on it. And I think there's a certain amount of sympathy.
Look, man, there's nobody better. There's nobody better at emceeing an event than you. Nobody. I've always said nobody brings you in better than Peter Robbins. Nobody. And then, we had Richard Dolan there and Grant Campbell.
Yeah. It was a really good conference. The other thing I remember was, again, particularly because we're lucky where I am to not have, as a rule, really humidity that's oppressive when the heat's up. And man, that was a humid day or a humid weekend, as I recall. Yeah. Also, it ended in a pretty spectacular way for me and several of the other participants. Jennifer Stein spoke, and Steve Allen, witness to...
yes, I love him.
And my God, it ended early on Sunday, early enough that Jennifer had put in a call to a dear friend of ours, Dr. Edgar Mitchell. And it's minutes after the conference ends. And she says, Ed wants us to come over for dinner. Are you up for that? She said, well, how long is it going to take? It'll be at least a 4-hour drive each way. Oh, I don't know. Yeah, right. So we took off with several others in tow and arrived at Ed's very modest home, edge of Miami. He came out to greet us. And the first thing he said was, I owe you all an apology. What do you mean? He said, I wanted to take you all out to dinner, but I learned as soon as I tried to make reservations, it's Mother's Day. I have not been able to get a single reservation for any place in town. I hope you don't mind. I ordered in. It should be here soon. It's the best Italian place in town. I, of course, told Jennifer to take me back to Daytona because I'm not going out to dinner. Well, we had one of the most memorable dinners I've ever had in Ed's kitchen with several neighbors and his assistant. He was not just, words fail, a incredibly courageous and brilliant man, a true visionary.
American hero.
Yes, an American hero, a human hero, the right stuff in the Tom Wolfe sense of the word of where that term came from. But he was one of the kindest and most thoughtful people I've met, and he had a great sense of humor. And he, at one point, other people doing other things, and he's walking Jennifer and I through the house. You can imagine.
I remember the photographs.
The memorabilia on the walls, just mind-blowing. And at one point, we stop in front of this big honkin' framed photograph of an aircraft carrier. The aircraft carrier that picked him and his teammates up when Apollo 14 splashed down. And, in big, bold, wonderful period lettering, Edgar Mitchell and, blah, blah, blah. I said, that's nice. He said, read it again. I went, Edgar, they spelled your name wrong? Said, can you believe it? So, then there's a small autographed photo to him from, head of Navy during World War II, a leading admiral, essentially thanking him for taking a very tiny object with him, because everybody had a certain amount, whatever it is in terms of ounces or a pound of personal stuff you could take with you. And just so that he could say, Ed Mitchell brought this to the moon, so that I could say Ed Mitchell brought this to the moon. And we go into his study, And there's let's see, I'm going off on a tangent here, but it's my show, so I can.
You sure can.
There's a big, beautiful polished block of wood with a brass plaque and this plastic, kind of aerogenically designed, real simple handle. This is the landing steering wheel, in so many words, of the lunar landing module for Apollo 14 that landed it on the moon. And I look at him, and I'm sure he did this many times. Said, "Go ahead." Yeah. After dinner, he did something I never remember anybody doing. We all kind of went into his living room. It was pouring like crazy. I had the fantasy idea for where we were all going to be rained into his house overnight. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. But he had a nice setup of couches around a big coffee table. And he said, "I want to ask each of you what you are doing in your lives to, in so many words, take responsibility for your little corner of the future." And we all kind of went around the room and talked about our best answer to that question. There was a pillow, a throw pillow on his couch, which completely cracked me up. He told me it was a gift from a woman friend. And it says in perfect petty point, could have been done in the 19th century, quote unquote, "If they can send a man to the moon, why not all of them?"
That's something my mom would have.
UFO research investigation conference speaking is not just a terrible way to make a living or to try to, it's an insane way, which I have pursued a good part of my life. But some of the perks on the job are priceless.
I used to say that about radio. It didn't pay for shit. But you got backstage passes to ZZ Top and Van Halen, and you got a lot of there was trade outs with the salon in town, and you got your hair cut for free, you got facials for free, you got to go eat at restaurants and stuff for free because we had trade outs with them. I mean, there's a lot of perks in the radio industry, much like it is here in the UFO. Like, when I started doing my podcast and started the KGRA, I had people coming from all directions that needed promotion, that wanted to do a show on the station, that had some need that I could fulfill. And it opened doors to places I never imagined. So yeah, you're 100% right. Where you found yourself that day, that was a memorable trip. That was I remember you guys leaving to go, and I remember thinking, God, I wish I could go, but I had to stay.
I remember standing out in front of the hotel with you and Robin, just taking a break between speakers and just chatting back and forth, but thinking, God, this humidity is oppressive. I need to get back inside.
That we were my group was leaving to go to the Sunset Grill to have dinner. And you had to speak, you had to introduce, you were emceeing the conference, so you still had things to do.
Yeah.
But we were all wrapping up for dinner right then when we were outside. That's where you and I were sitting out there blowing one. We were smoking a cigarette and shooting the breeze.
Yeah.
And I set my smartphone down and my wallet down between us. We got up, you went in, I went and got in the truck, and we all, ran a vehicle train, 4 or 5 cars to the Sunset Grill. I get to the Sunset Grill, park the truck, and I'm getting out, and I'm like getting my wallet right together. And I can't find my wallet. And Robin and I drove from Arkansas 22 hours to get down there.
Whoa.
And so everything I had, all my credit cards, all my cash, I had almost $1,000 in cash in that wallet. And I'm like, oh my God.
Nobody's that honest that they're going to bring those to the desk.
We jumped back in the truck. All my friends went on and ordered food like nothing happened. Them son bitches went in. And they were eating and drinking.
Yeah, good luck.
I'm out on the lanai, you know what I mean? Over the water, over the ocean out there. Just, hope you find it. And Robin and I got lost trying to go.
Oh no.
We ended up in the middle of an orange orchard.
Jesus.
I had to stop and ask someone who didn't speak any English how to get to the Sebring, the hotel
And your
the
entire
the resort.
identity and keys.
And he fetched someone else that came out, and he's like, "Yeah, just go down this road, take a left, take a right." We made it back. I ran I had to park away, ran up to the front. I saw something black on that bench we were sitting on.
It was still there.
It was my phone. The wallet was gone. So the smartphone was there, and I was sick to my stomach. And Robin came up and she said, "Was that it? Was that it?" I said, "It was my phone." I held it up. She said, "Oh my God, what are we going to do?" And I said, "Well, I guess I'm going to go in and just happen to see if anyone turned it in." She said, "Race, if they didn't turn in the phone, they wouldn't turn in the wallet." And I said, "I don't care. I'm going to check." So I went to the front desk and I said that I had lost my wallet out front. Did anyone happen to turn it in? And she said, "What's your name?" And I said, "Race Hobbs." And she said, "Do you have any ID?" And I said, "I do. It's in my wallet."
It's in the wallet. Check the picture.
And then I was like, and Robin, I felt something hit my chest, and Robin grabbed my big press badge that had my name and my picture and everything on it for KGRA. And she held it up. She said, "This is him." And she went over and she unlocked this drawer and she pulled the drawer open and she said, "Is this it?" And I just looked at Robin and we hugged each other. And she said, "I take that as a yes." And so she opened it up and I said, "The driver's license is in there." She looked and it was me. And she handed it back to me and I looked and all the money was in it. All the cards were in it.
How beautiful.
And I asked her, I said, "Who turned this in?" And she said, "The hotel manager found it out there. And he's the one who brought it in and turned it in."
Interesting that he didn't bring the phone.
I know.
Anyway.
And so about that time he came walking through the door and she goes, "There he is right there." And so I went over and shook his hand and I thanked him and I tried to give him $100. I was like, "Here, please take this. I appreciate." He goes, "I'm not taking that." He said, "I did what I was supposed to do, or my mom would have killed me." And so there's still great people in this. And that was the story from that night with me and you out there smoking on the
we both had a pretty good night.
And you went on to see Edgar Mitchell and get to meet a true American hero and somebody that is truly pivotal in all of the work that we do every day in this UFO UAP craziness. I mean, he has gone on the record with some of the most colorful sound bites and statements from someone of his credentials. I don't think there's anyone else that can match him. To me,
I'll share one other story. And again, if Edgar Mitchell's name rings a bell, but not completely, he was the sixth man to walk on the moon. And when we were at the house, I had a number of conversations with him over the years. It was a much more relaxed atmosphere. And again, after he had, told me some things that made me laugh, I realized I could ask him a question without him, taking it any other way but the spirit it was meant, which was, "I want to ask you about a moment in your life. You've talked about it, but you and the two other astronauts you're with, it's mission day. You launch. You go 250,000 miles and you land this incredibly complex little machine on the surface of the moon. You're there for the period of time you are. And, you're prepared to disembark. That device, let's say it had, 50, 100,000 moving parts. Everyone manufactured by the lowest government bidder." And he cut me off mid-sentence and smiled and said, literally almost reading my mind, "We were too well trained." failure was not an option in any sense, even in a brief fantasy. We all were realists. We knew that if something happened, it would happen very quickly, and that would be it. But it never occurred to me that the mission would not be successful. We were too well trained. And to back that up, he took us into another room and he showed us a whole series of photos of him in one of the many things they did in preparation with the astronauts. They put them through everything possible. And this was I think like a 6-day tropical jungle survival course. Not that they were going to be in the jungle, but every possible facility needed to be engaged or potentially engaged.
I mean, what if their landing was off course and they had to survive on an island or something for a while?
That's another thing. There you go. That would be a direct aspect of it. Anyway, yeah, Ed was incredible. Well, the fact that we had one more person with world-class credentials coming forward and backing up people whose accounts might seem dubious to folks that weren't informed or involved or educated or were just anxious about the subject and tended to react by rejecting it. Let me ask you, your career is moving along, and at a certain point, you interfaced with somebody who for you is major, somebody who you either read about or seen on television or followed their work, and all of a sudden there you are and you're being treated essentially like a colleague. Do you remember a moment like that with any of the many people that you've interviewed over the years or worked with?
That's a long list. I grew into this movement highly respecting all of the greats that were in the public view. There's so many people that are involved in UFO studies.
I meant it more as kind of a personal wow sort of moment.
That's Richard Dolan.
Very good.
That's our good friend Richard Dolan. That was what I was leading up to. There's a lot of it, but when you whittle it down, for me, it was Richard, because when I read the National Security State, Volume 1, I was certain that if you and it's interesting, and I'll make a note here. If you could get the government in a court of law on the charge of covering up UFOs, you could convict them hands down with that one book. Period. They wouldn't have a prayer.
It's a very important book.
I literally had an attorney from Australia say the same thing to me at an event one year. But I befriended Richard. I met him at a conference, got his autograph, bought the book, and then later met him at the Ozark UFO conference again. And by then we were friends on Facebook, and I had been making posts to him and communicating with him through our Arkansas West Central Section MUFON Facebook page.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Which
was the one that I pretty much stayed on promoting all of that when I was in it. But, I had told him there, that was me that was running that page. And he goes, "Oh my gosh, I didn't know that was you." And so, we sat down and talked for a little bit, and I wound up friending him on Facebook and Twitter, on my account. And we corresponded through email, Facebook, and Twitter a couple times. When I started Eyewitness Radio, I wanted him to be the first guest of the show. And so I reached out to him. Of course, he agreed, and he was our very first guest and our very last. He was our first. And when it came time to shut that, because once I started KGRA, eventually I didn't have time to do my own show anymore because I'm busy producing everybody else's. the producer, I was the engineer, I was the program director, was head of operations, I was website, social media. I was doing it all. And started with 4 partners. I was actually a co-founder, right? But by the time they all fell to the wayside, it was just me. And I was working with Richard Dolan every 7th day of the week. Every week, 2 or 3 days a week, I was on with him, working with him, collaborating with him as his producer. Sadly, he was going through some personal things in his life. He was going through a divorce with Karen, and it was not easy on him, and so he was just going through some life stuff, and I was trying to be his friend and be there with him, to help him any way I could, because we had grown quite close.
Yeah.
And every time I turned around, I was like, how lucky am I that I am colleagues and friends with such a real talent in what we'd love to do. And he was the wow. I always said then I was his number 1 fan, and I'm still his number 1 fan.
Yeah, he is. He's a remarkable man. He is brilliant. He is a terrific educator. I don't know if he thinks of himself like that, but many of us
but
have learned so much from him.
I've still got the Post-it note, Peter, where when I decided to go from Eyewitness Radio to KGRA and start this station, and we called it the Global Radio Alliance, because we wanted to bring a bunch of radio shows together in one place in an alliance, a force in the UFO movement where you could come and every moment you spent was quality time spent. You would never leave the KGRA saying, I'll never get that time back. That's just what we didn't want. And so I reached out to Richard and asked him if he'd be interested in doing a show when I was developing KGRA. And we had a meeting set up, and I had scribbled it on a Post-it note, put it on my my dry eraser board. And I still got it, Thursday at 1:00, meeting with Richard Dolan. And I was so nervous in that conversation, but I just honestly told him what I could do, what I couldn't do. And he said, give me some time. I need a couple of days to go think about this. He wound up calling me back later that day and asking me a few more questions. And he said, let's do it. Let's do it. So he agreed to come on KGRA. He was my first really big A-list name. That was the first of many over the years that came, along with Linda Moulton Howe, L.A. Marzulli, Grant Cameron, so many others. I don't want to not leave everybody out, but there's so many people that came to work with me over the years that our good friend Lee Spiegel, who did a radio show on WNBC in New York.
In fact, I think I told you the story, but we met in the later 1980s when I was a guest on his radio show, which again was major. It went out all over
New
the country.
York.
Yep, right.
Edge of reality radio in New York.
That's it. And one of the things we learned about each other at that moment was that 10 years earlier, which was my first serious UFO event, I was very new to the work relatively, but I'd gotten a job working to help edit a paper by my very first mentor, a retired member of the staff of the Royal Hungarian Army during World War II, in charge of photo reconnaissance and photo analysis. And he had a cordial relationship with the Secretary General of the UN, and at his request had written a paper, I think a very visionary one, about concerns about the Soviets or the Americans misinterpreting a genuine incursion of a truly anomalous UFO for an ICBM, and tragedy ensuing. Anyway, the event, which was sponsored by the Prime Minister of the small Caribbean nation of Grenada, Sir Eric Gehry, the man who the young man, early 20s, who was on Gary's case, became his advisor, helped organize the meetings, was a very young Lee Spiegel. It was Lee who brought together Alan Hynek, Jacques Vallée, Stanton Friedman. Gordon Cooper was not able to come because we had a blizzard the day before. Lieutenant Colonel Lawrence Coyne, who had been recently involved in a very famous helicopter semi-abduction by a UFO, all spoke on the floor of the General Assembly. My parents both took the day off from work and joined me at the UN.
Wow.
We might have been sitting right next to Lee's parents up in the gallery section. We might have passed in the hallway, but we didn't know each other or our part in the thing, which we discovered 10 years later when I first was a guest on a show. And that's when our friendship started. And another greater guy and more valuable contributor to the work I can't think of. I wanted to ask you, as you got deeper involved and one situation would take you to the next, we do meet some people who either claim to be or are folks with a past or present involved in projects that may be classified or genuinely one of those people, as opposed to somebody who wants you to think they are. Do you remember a time when you ever felt that you had gotten in to some particular aspect of the subject or a relationship with somebody you had worked with on radio or met at a conference that potentially was anxiety provoking or problematic for you in that sense? And you don't have to name the person if that's the case.
Well, I'll say this. There was I had when I was in MUFON, this was probably around 2009, 2008, somewhere in there. 2009 probably. No, it was probably later, around 10 or 11. But I found myself in an interview with the then sitting international director of the organization. And after that interview, we were on, of course, like a post-show conversation. We have a lot of conversations after we do these interviews off the air with people. And I remember having this conversation with the, he was soon to be outgoing. He was soon to be leaving. And he confessed to me that, I just asked him, I said, do you think MUFON's infiltrated, sort of by CIA or FBI or, whatever. Yeah. And he confessed to me, the international director confessed to me right then on the phone that he wouldn't doubt it, that he was pretty certain that, it was. And I remember after he said that, he said, "You're not recording this, are you?" And I remember thinking, "Oh, shit, I don't think so." And he said, "Yeah." He goes, off the record. He goes, after that, he said, off the record, I would say we are. And, because I was recording it, and then up to that point, I shut it off because the tape was rolling from the show, right? So later, after considering what he said, I started thinking, up until then, investigating UFOs was just this sort of hobby and an interesting thing to do, and kind of a right thing to do, a righteous thing to do.
Yes.
But I remember after that conversation that night, I got this sick feeling that I've handed out business cards to lawyers and farmers and everything in between. And one day somebody could call me and say, I got your card from so-and-so. And this has happened actually, but there's something that crashed into my field back here, and I don't think it's from us. And then I go respond to it, and I do the whole MUFON thing and go through step by step the protocols. And I realized that there could be somebody knocking on my door that didn't have any identification, that didn't, you know, give me any, but that had nefarious intentions about what I had found myself and was involved in. And it could be DIA, it could be NSA, it could be FBI, it could be CIA, it could be any one of the alphabet agencies.
Yep.
Or even one that has no name, which we know exists. And I could find myself, snatched up and carried off to somewhere and never even heard from again. Because we've heard these stories, and I think up until that point, I felt like that in the back of my mind, they weren't true. They were just kind of made up. But I found myself terrified about it for a while after
that. Whether real or imagined, or as professor at NYU once said to me, you don't have to be a paranoid to know that someone is following you. I think some of us in the work do have episodes like this. Others hope we do.
Well, I think
there's a romance to it for a lot of people, especially when you're early involved.
Right, of course. And, I was self-taught, from, the early 90s. It was just a hobby and interest that turned into a fascinating subject to learn about. And then, and I did a lot of reading. Back then, you had libraries. You didn't have Google and videos to watch and stuff like that. You might have In Search Of and a couple of, stuff. But I mean, if you're listening to my voice, you see this video and you are a true, investigator of UFOs, just remember that if this is what you're doing, you're on the front lines of something that is highly protected within the ranks of the U.S. military industrial complex at the highest levels, the very highest levels. And we are, very minuscule to them.
Without realizing it, you brought us to perfect springboard for my next question. As we know, since late 2017, things have changed markedly to a degree, slowly at first, and with frustrating slowness for many since. But I'd say the demarcation is essentially a post-ridicule period that reflects that we and our parents and our grandparents had been absolutely locked onto from the brilliant education that Americans were given in the summer of 1947, that there's more and more regular folks care less and less what other folks think about what they think about the subject. And that never used to be the way it was. I think one of the most extraordinary aspects of this, it's sort of a footnote to what's been happening in Congress the last couple of years, and of course coming on us increasingly for more than a year now, with most recently, several months, 2 months ago as we talk, this historic hearing in the House of Representatives. One of the most important aspects of this for me that isn't getting a lot talked about, but is crucially important for the future of this country, is this subject, now that it's starting to open up, and now that an assortment of our elected officials in Washington, knowing that taking a public serious interest in it is not going to hurt their career, have been educating themselves. And I'm sure having some assistance from folks that can, bring them up to speed. And it has formed some of the potentially, I think, most crucial alliances among people who politically, more and more, there are forces that try to condition us to despise each other or to mistrust each other on a greater and greater level in this country, as opposed to find ways to bring us together. One of the greatest things about the American experiment has been this tipping point of coming to a consensus agreement that it can't be all your way or my way, so we need to find a way to work together. And when I see a classic card-carrying conservative Republican like Marco Rubio and a very progressive Democrat like my Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, absolutely locked arm in arm, at least allegorically, but on this issue actually moving together. And in doing so, it wouldn't surprise me if there is a real friendship that's coming out of it. And more recently, Charles Schumer, the senior senator from my state, arch liberal progressive who, bears the sign of the beast for some folks, and at the same time is, doing his thing, that he has come up with an amendment to only add to the ability of congressional representatives and senators to have access to far more material than they were going back further. I think this is one of the most exciting and healthy things that we've seen in government in a long time. And if this thing really does blow out at a certain point and we enter that true disclosure era, I think we're all going to be seeing each other with a great deal more in common than we have separating us, especially with the implications of that we're not alone. I just feel it's a good thing. And I wondered what your gut thoughts are on this.
Politically, the only thing separating us is politicians. Ethically, the only thing that's separating the truth from the lies is the military-industrial complex. In the reality of it, it's never going to happen, in my opinion. The military-industrial complex is so tightly woven into corporate America.
It's so powerful.
It is. It's ultimately powerful. When you think about the world economies, there's the United States. We have a multi-trillion-dollar economy. China has a multi-trillion-dollar economy. When you think about asset managers in the corporate world, there's a company called BlackRock that I think is like $7.2, $7.5 trillion worth of assets. They control the assets for Apple, for Amazon, for Google. I mean, for all of they have, it's a corporation with more assets than anyone else in the world besides China and the United States. And it's a corporate entity. And the military-industrial complex is so tightly woven into these tech companies, and they don't need to spy like they used to in the old days. They have all of my data and all of everyone out there that just heard Peter cough into the mic. Every one of you are being watched and surveyed, not by an individual or individuals, but by artificial intelligence that is gathering every word you say, everything you type, every email you send. Sadly, you are being tracked, everything you do. They made it cool, really cool. And you're not cool if you don't have this. If you don't have, like Peter Robbins, a landline over there. Peter's still with his feet on the ground. He doesn't want to get into all of this. And I love that about him.
Well, I have
people don't realize
one of these things, but I use my landline as much as possible.
Right. You do have one, but you prefer the land. But this is a box full of sensors that can track you down to a few inches right here, that can listen to everything you say. If you don't think it's listening, hey, Google, and it'll come right on. It's listening all the time. It's recording every keystroke you make, every app. When I open up my phone here really quickly, every app that's on that phone, that's my beautiful mother, but every app that was on that phone, every one of those little dots is an app, and every one of those apps have a agreement that you have to agree to use it. And if you actually went into it and you looked into the details of those agreements, it says that they can share and sell your information. They can track you. And it also says, like a lot of people don't realize on TikTok can sync with my tower, my computer tower. It can sync with my laptop or my tablets. And all the information that it can hijack from it, they can take and use. From all of your devices, your electronic devices that can connect through this phone, they can access and they can get the information and keep it. So when you have data collection at that level, and Edward Snowden was the first one I ever heard that came out and was shouting it from the mountaintops and turned out to be 100% true.
That's right.
Then when you have that, you have total control, because I'm going through because I need to get a pair of shoes, and they know how long I look at this pair of shoes before I scroll away from it and go to the next and stop. They know how long I'm looking at it. These phones, there's a little dot right there at the top that has a camera that's looking at you, that can tell where your pupils are trained on the screen. They know where you're looking on the screen at visuals.
And whether your pupils are dilated.
I mean, it's insane when you think about how many sensors are in this thing, that they made it so cool to have rather than not. So we're all hauling these things around, and it's feeding them nonstop all of the time, constantly. You can take the battery out of this phone. You can take the battery out of it, and it still will transmit. People don't know that, but it's the truth. And so I think that the military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned us about,
yes,
that he warned Kennedy about,
yes,
that ultimately killed Kennedy, in my opinion, those are the kind of people, people don't realize, it's bad socially out here. If you are a Trump supporter, I'm not supposed to talk to you. If you're a Biden supporter, I'm not supposed to talk to you. I have never seen politics this divisive ever in my life, and it's them that's turning us against us. But you constantly remind us, Peter, that we all have more in common than we don't have in common. And that we all have the same, we bleed the same blood. We have the same love to raise our families in peace, and our friends, and have our relationships and our loves and our expressions and everything, just like everyone else, in peace. And they don't want it. They want us chasing our tail all the time. Look over here while we do over there. That's just as simple and as layman, because everything I say is layman, because I'm about as shallow as a puddle. But everything I'm saying is the truth.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just mountains of evidence that can back it up. And at the end of the day, I don't, all of us that are out here waiting on the government to divulge the truth and to tell the truth, waiting on them to make it all real, is not coming. It's not going to happen.
I didn't mean to suggest that with the question that I asked. It was more, despite the realities that you have absolutely nailed down, and I wish I could disagree with
I don't
you
have any
on
faith in
anything
the
you've said.
politician. Mark Rubio or anybody else. I don't have any faith in them because the system that we're in now is the best system that money can buy. And it used to be okay when American money was buying American politicians, but now it's foreign money buying American politicians. And so, they're getting informed about the UFO subject, but ultimately the handlers of all the information, all the photographs, Peter, that exist in the Rendlesham case, all of the videos that were taken over there and the photos that were taken over there, where are they? Where is the film that Gordon Cooper's guys filmed of that UFO landing in that dry lake bed? Oh, that they have gun camera footage, Poseidon footage. They have footage that would knock our socks off. This crap that's dribbling out to us now is ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
Where is the footage, you ask? For me, allegorically, it's all in the big warehouse that Indiana Jones shows us at the end of the first episode, and along with the Ark of the Covenant and all that stuff.
The guys that have the key to that lock, though, Peter, are the ones that are ultimately the holders of the truth.
Yeah.
The ones that Marco Rubio and these guys will never be able to reach, I'm afraid.
I guess what I'm saying here is, even if it turns out, with the benefit of hindsight, years from now, looking back on this historical period of time, that even if the hearings that continue to progress, no matter what is said in them, it's all kind of a managed kabuki play to keep attention focused, and it still has the effect of legitimizing the subject more and more for more regular folks, and bringing more politicians who are diametrically opposed to each other's positions together. And there's something else that goes on here, which is the moment that the person that you have been conditioned to know, to believe, to understand is, if not your enemy, somebody to not be trusted, to be kept an eye on, scrape the surface, and you're going to see a darker person, a darker sensibility, that once the demystification starts of just working on something together, room opens for the previously unimaginable, which is a friendship. It's one of the things that I think is best about what's happening right now, that more and more of these politicians who, I think about Tip O'Neill and Ron Reagan, classic liberal, classic conservative, diametrically opposed in public on certain issues, but not only filled with the original founder's idea of compromise, but good friends, real friends who, play a certain role in the public arena. And I think that's terribly important. We don't have a lot else. And at the same time, I think disclosure is a process. If a president's or a premier or a king or a prime minister's hand is ever forced, and I think the only really out of control aspect is if they, or whatever group of them, kind of say, we've given you 100 years or thereabouts to kind of get used to this thing, you're still, time's up, and here we are, get used to it. There was a mini series, I think in the 80s, and it was remade 4 or 5 years ago. I thought it was a bit cheesy, especially the original one. You may be a fan of it or not. Which, aliens, classic, almost Twilight Zone idea of to serve man, come to Earth. They not only are here to cure cancer, make us all love each other, give us enough food, control population, everything good, but they all look like, they're models. And they all look terrific, of course, under their latex skin. They're not as attractive, and they eat mice and us and other nasty things. And then it becomes like every World War II resistance movie I've ever seen in my life. But it had one of the best premises, beginnings of any science fiction construct I've ever come across. And I'm talking about H.G. Wells, Jules Verne, Ray Bradbury, take your pick, Gene Roddenberry.
Yeah.
One morning, everybody in the world wakes up and learns that over the 60 biggest cities on the planet, 1 mile up is a giant hunking round mothership, 1 mile across. Game over. I thought that was great. And that would be the ultimate wake-up call, wouldn't it?
Well, you know, I mean, there's several levels of awake, and that is the ultimate level right there. That's the one.
Well, that's one of the kind of club you over the head levels.
They've done a great job, though, over the years of establishing that the UFO element, the UFO subject, is probably a hostile one. And, first of all, I agree with everything you said, I mean, pretty much about, how we work together, how we come together, and there's a lot of good things that are coming out of this legislation and about, and these congressmen and senators that are waking up and getting educated into what we already know is real. But at the end of the day, I think their ability to get to the real evidence. But if they can pass legislation that can make it possible for military and and take the stigma away from civilian pilots where they can't be ridiculed or lose their
job.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what I'm talking about. And if these legislators, if these politicians can work together to put together legislation that frees up military and former military people and intelligence people and commercial airline pilots and the like, these trained observers, these people that we expect to have high credibility and trustworthiness, and those that are up there in the skies where these things are seen, is going to help a lot. That right there could be a game changer. And it's good that these politicians, that these congressmen and senators are working together, they're unified, over this. I don't want, dirty politicians weaponizing, funding and to weaponize space. We don't need to weaponize space. We don't need to. And we need to de-weaponize Earth is what we need to do, and I see that we're up against the end of the show, the producer in me. But Peter, super glad you're here. Thank you for coming over from my old network to my new one that I'm, producing and engineering over here as a programmer. Thank you, Margie K, for, providing us this platform and a home for true, real alternative talk radio. And thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure being on here. I'm sorry I trailed off so much. This is such a great format. And I've loved it ever since we worked on it together and started it. And now here I am and just walking down that road. Now, I didn't present pictures or anything, but hopefully I can come back and bring pictures and everything, and we can do this again. But thank you very much, Peter. I truly appreciate it.
I'd like to thank you very much for being my guest. A giant hug to you, brother. Love to Robin. We will be back next week on Meanwhile Here on Earth. Please stay well. Stand up for what you believe in. Fight for what you believe in even. And be kind to each other. Until next week.